Ormus being a spiritual and nutritional supplement. Now, what the heck does that mean, anyway? Well, in Sanskrit, you find a term, asaudi. Asaudi describes a group of substances that facilitate the expression of consciousness through the form. What you have always been is an individualized aspect of pure consciousness itself, having a human experience through an increasingly denser set of vehicles ending up in the physical body. You have a physical body, you have emotions, you have a mind. It's not what you are. It's what that consciousness expresses through and experiences all of creation through those vehicles. So the goal of yoga is to consciously experience and live in that state of pure consciousness, independent of any attachment to or identification with any of the vehicles that consciousness is expressing through. So asaudi are substances that facilitate the expression of consciousness through the form. It's not a magic bullet, it's not going to do it for you, but as an adjunct to your spiritual practices, it will supercharge your spiritual practices. Now, if you're not doing spiritual practices, it will make the body very healthy anyway. So if you're not interested in spirituality, that's okay. It's still good for you. No, that's what it does. Now, how does it do that? Everybody wants to know how it does that. And chemistry itself doesn't have an explanation for Ormus. It runs out of room because the materialistic model that chemistry is based on does not include the subtle realms and does not assume that consciousness is the basis for the manifested universe. This is the difference between scientific materialism and idealism. These are the two competing philosophies at this point. If you've gone to school, you were programmed with scientific materialism. The basic MD assumes that consciousness is a byproduct of the chemicals interacting in your brain. This is not the case. The brain is a byproduct of consciousness. Consciousness became the vehicle it expressed through. So these are two different philosophies. And if you can't separate that out and try and demand an explanation from a scientific materialist perspective, even though you subscribe to the idealist perspective, then confusion will result. So you need to get clear on consciousness is the ocean out of which all waves arise. We're all waves of the ocean of the absolute pure consciousness. Okay. So that being the case, once that infinite pure potential that is unmanifest polarizes, it polarizes into what we call Shiva and Shakti. Shiva manifests as Purusha, Shakti manifests as Prakriti, nature. Prakriti becomes the material of all the planes of creation and organizes into different vehicles for consciousness, Purusha, Shiva, to express through. This is the play of Shiva and Shakti, the Lila. So, at a certain point, the separation from our true nature causes a lot of pain. And to overcome that pain, we finally decide to get on with it and start engaging in spiritual practices to resolve the issues so that we can consciously experience in this form and through this form the full value of our true nature, which is pure consciousness itself. So, how Ormus accomplishes this? I'm going to use the periodic table here because this kind of relates to it. Ormus is basically the platinum metal group of elements, but not expressed in the dense form that this chart describes. This chart describes the densest expression of those energies that have become the elements. Now, Ormus, to really understand Ormus, you have to turn this thing sideways and move behind it. What were these energies before they came into their dense expression? Now, science doesn't acknowledge that. We're talking about subatomic particles and all this other stuff, but they're still talking about physical stuff. We're talking about etheric, subtle, an octave up, out of the range of instruments. Instruments don't have the sensitivity to reach into the subtle realms. Only consciousness can do that. But since consciousness is subjective, it's distrusted by science. It has to be objective. So, but everything essentially is subjective to begin with. So when you look at the subtle expressions, the pre-metallic expressions of the platinum metal group, it exhibits completely different properties than its dense metallic expression. Ormus is the subtle pre-metallic, non-metallic expression of that group that eventually becomes metallic in its densest expression. In that subtle state, it exhibits superconducting properties. If you put a magnet next to it in its dried powdered form, it will jump away from the magnetic field. Now, if you have that in a solid space, a magnetic field will bend to go around it. So only superconductors exhibit this property. And normally you can only get a superconductor at like close to absolute zero. So to have a superconductor at body temperature that likes to live in the synapses between your neurons, when that superconductor is in the neurology in that way, it does amazing things to your neurology. Consciousness can express through that neurology less conditionally, just more completely. And in that way, the attributes inherent in the vehicles are a space is created for them to start expressing. So siddhi, the perfections, start to express in a vehicle that has been refined to the point that allows consciousness to express through it to that degree. So, any questions?